Today, I am Sushila Jayapal, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2, representing North and Northeast Portland. I am so delighted to be with you all today to kick off this celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Gateway Center for Domestic Violence. Before we begin, though, I just want to acknowledge, I think, what's on all of our minds, which is the devastation that's happening around our state today. I know we're all thinking about the thousands of people who've had to leave their homes and may have lost their homes for good, as well as our firefighters and our first responders, and trying to figure out how we can help. These fires obviously make what's already a really difficult time more difficult, and it makes me even more glad to be coming together here today around this important work. I want to start by thanking former Commissioner Dan Salzman. Commissioner Salzman couldn't be with us today, but he is very much here in the spirit and the vision that are embodied in the Gateway Center, a comprehensive, multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency center that brings together under one roof so many of the services needed by people experiencing intimate partner and domestic violence. Thank you, Commissioner Salzman, for your vision and your commitment to bringing it to life. I also want to recognize my fellow commissioners who might be here or are joining us soon, Commissioner Vega Peterson, Commissioner Myron, and our new district attorney, Mike Schmidt, who texted me to let me know that the courthouse is full of smoke, but he's hoping to get to a place where he can join us very soon. And I believe that my Gateway Center co-chair, Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, will be joining us a little later as well. So we first started talking about having an anniversary celebration about a year ago, the fall of 2019. And what we wanted to do and what we're going to do is to look back on the history of the center, celebrate everything that it has accomplished, and then also equally and maybe more importantly, look forward to start a process of envisioning what we want the next 10 years to look like, both for the center and for the systems in which it operates. We obviously did not know then where we were going to be today in September 2020. We didn't know that we were going to be in the midst of an unprecedented public health crisis, a public health crisis that has laid bare the inequities of our systems of healthcare, employment, education, and so much more. We didn't know that we'd be months into a movement for Black lives, a movement for racial justice that has forced us to confront the profound racial injustices of our criminal legal system. These two seismic shifts in our landscape make the work of reimagining our domestic and sexual violence systems even more timely and more important than ever before. Domestic and sexual violence sits at the intersection of public health and public safety, and domestic and sexual violence is experienced along the same fault lines and intersections of race, economic status, gender, and sexuality as have been highlighted by the pandemic and the movement for racial justice. We know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants, and LGBTQ people, particularly transgender people, experience family and intimate partner violence at higher rates, and that this is because of economic instability, trauma, and other factors created by racially and culturally biased systems. And we know that these impacts can be exacerbated by our criminal legal system, causing those most vulnerable to be less likely to seek help and support. So this has been said many times, but it bears repeating. As challenging and as difficult as our current landscape is, it also presents real opportunity. We have the opportunity, and it is time, to imagine what true safety and healing look like for people experiencing domestic and sexual violence. We have the opportunity to center the voices of those who experience harm and to ask them what they need and want in order to be safe, to heal, and to hold accountable those who have caused harm. And by centering those voices, we have the opportunity to transform our system into one that's flexible, adaptive, responsive, and truly safe. Doing this work requires resources, partnerships, and collaborations across jurisdictions and systems, including the city and county, law enforcement agencies, and nonprofit partners. And we're fortunate at the center and in Multnomah County to have those partnerships. I particularly want to thank the City of Portland for its ongoing support of the Gateway Center and all of the many partners who join us in this work. And none of it would be possible without the dedication and unwavering commitment of the Gateway Center's staff, its director, Martha Strong Morris, and her entire team. I particularly want to thank them for their incredible work over the last several months in response to COVID. When COVID hit, the need to shut down in-person services was immediate, but so also was the increasing demand for services caused by the consequences of the stay-at-home order, consequences that included an increase in the incidence of domestic violence. The staff at the Gateway Center were able to quickly transition to work remotely and yet still continue to provide much needed services over the phone to those most vulnerable in our community. Responding to this new reality was not an easy task, and I want to thank each and every person who continues to provide support and guidance to our community as we all navigate this unprecedented moment. And with that, I'm really looking forward to hearing the other presenters and the panelists. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Martha Strawn-Morris, Director of the Gateway Center for Domestic Violence.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I think some slides are going to come up here for me pretty soon. My time with you is going to last until about noon and will mostly be a reflection of the past 10 years. At the end of my time, you'll know some history of the center, our service delivery model, the partners that make up our community. I'm going to be joined midway by two guests who are going to highlight their particularly transformative programs. And I'll conclude with a reflection on our impact, the impact we've had in the community, and a note about what's been influencing our more recent evolutions at the center. I know that many of you who are joining us today are intimately familiar with what we do at the Gateway Center, and some of you are less so. And my hope is that wherever you are on that spectrum, this presentation will have something in it for you. If I fail in that effort, I assure you, the final hour of this program will have something new for everyone. We have assembled an amazing and talented panel to help us imagine what our future could look like. Thank you to Claire Barrera, who helped build the vision for the panel and agreed to facilitate it. Next slide, please. So jumping into a little history, the concept behind the Gateway Center, the co-location of a variety of services in one location, was first noted locally by our Family Violence Coordinating Council. But the mantle, as Commissioner Jayapal mentioned, was really picked up by Commissioner Dan Saltzman, who commissioned a feasibility study to explore the concept with both survivors and stakeholders in the community. And based on the positive result of that study, was able to lobby for and win a substantial investment in order to get the Gateway Center opened. The county was less flush at the time, but was also able to make a substantial contribution with a then vacant 11,000 square foot building that was conveniently located on a MAX line and in proximity to the expertise of the domestic violence reduction unit of the Portland Police. So the partnership between both the arms of local government, Multnomah County and the city of Portland, became the bowl in which other services and programs could fold. There's always been an advisory council made up of various partners to help guide policy and development for the center. And I'd like to thank all the past and present members of the council. And importantly, thank you to Commissioners Jayapal and Hardesty, who are our current co-chairs. I would also like to note here that domestic violence leaders in Multnomah County helped ensure that the Gateway Center would work for survivors beyond those who were interested in criminal justice services. I would particularly give credit to Chiquita Rollins for ensuring that we adopted an advocacy first model. It's been a model that's worked really well for us, and I'm glad we had that leadership at the time. Next slide, please. I mentioned that there was a feasibility study and that study interviewed survivors. The clearest message that came from survivors at that time was that they wanted an additional access point for restraining orders. They didn't want to have to go downtown for restraining orders. So with a federal grant, as well as a grant from the Mount Hood Cable Regulatory Commission, we were able to establish a satellite courtroom from the very first day. You can see our senators there talking to Judge Maureen McKnight through the video, which is how survivors in non-pandemic times see the judge to get a restraining order when they come to the Gateway Center. And I would say that this courtroom, along with the childcare, which has been generously funded by the Portland Children's Levy, are two of the most important physical features of the building. Next slide. As I noted before, we use an advocacy first service model. So when survivors come to the Gateway Center, they meet first with a community-based advocate. We call them navigators. They are our first responders at Gateway. So they do direct advocacy, they do domestic violence education, they do safety planning, they provide restraining order facilitation, as well as connect survivors to services both on and off site. Our navigators work incredibly hard, so hard that individual advocates may only navigate for 3 days a week or less, lest they face harmful levels of secondary trauma. So to all the past and present navigators, thank you. You are rock stars. Your caring, compassionate efforts have made a difference in so many lives. And next. So from the beginning, we have had a pretty healthy array of services. We contracted with a nice variety of community-based domestic violence programs to provide the navigator services. We had public partnership from the start with the court, with the DA's office, with DHS and the sheriff, and had LASSO and LifeWorks and the Relief Nursery from VOA were all with us from the beginning. And next. And we added some partners along the way. We expanded our service array. Impact Northwest brought their parent-child therapeutic services in 2012, and you're going to hear more from them in just a minute. And Noodle showed up in 2013. And then in 2014, YWCA brought the Yolanda Project to Gateway Center. In 2015, Disability Awareness Resource Team joined us, then the Crime Victims Law Center, and finally in 2017, Immigration Legal Services became an on-site partner. And you could go to the next. Each program that I have listed deserves attention and focus, but we only had time to highlight two today, and both these programs, I think, highlight the theme of transformation. The YWCA transformed their shelter services, and Impact Northwest services transformed through healing and strengthening the bond between parents and children. So with that, I am going to invite Jadra Hennessy from the YWCA to introduce herself and present. And Jadra, when you're done, if you will please invite Stephanie Roche and Erin Fanchur to follow you, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Martha. Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Martha. I'd like to thank you for inviting me here today, as long as thank you and your entire team for all of the work that you do, both in serving survivors as well as in coordinating all of us partner agencies at the center in non-COVID times, and all of the work that you've done to continue serving survivors in these erratic times that we live in these days. So yes, I am proud to be here to talk about the Yolanda Project today and the work that we do in housing survivors through the Gateway Center. I came to the YWCA in 2014, just after the agency had closed our emergency shelter and shifted services to a housing first mobile advocacy direct client assistance model. I remember in my interview, I thought it was, I was a bit skeptical. I had worked in shelters for the previous 10 years or so, and it was a pretty mind-blowing concept that you could just directly house people without shelter first. Having worked and had to reach out to multiple agencies and do a lot of groundwork to cobble together small amounts of funds to get someone into housing, the idea of just having money to pay direct services, to provide direct services and pay housing assistance, security deposits, rent, basic needs, seemed too good to be true. It seemed a little simple. It seemed to me like the idea might be a little naive. Trish Martin, the director of the program at that time, quickly, answered all my questions and concerns and challenged me to think beyond the box of what that was. She agreed that shelter was necessary for some survivors, but also encouraged me to think about those folks who didn't necessarily need protective shelter because of their levels of danger, but mostly were accessing that as a primary point of service. So, the YWCA, along with agencies like the Gateway Center, created more access points to individuals in the community who weren't in need of shelter, who were able to move directly into housing or stay in the housing they were in after an abuser left. In that work that we were doing, or they were doing, I came in shortly after, as I said, the first year of the programming, the one housing specialist at the Gateway Center was able to house 128 survivors in that first fiscal year that we were operating. Previously, the shelter had been serving about 65 heads of household a year. So 127 was a huge increase in the number of people that we were able to stably house just through that program, as well as through our partnership with Home Forward, where we had 2 advocates co-located at that time. So building on that work, we've continued to grow and build and find that we have served exponentially more people, and we receive feedback from survivors about the ease of access, the often surprise that they feel in being able to meet with a program that is able to meet with them fairly quickly after seeking services, that's responsive, that can meet people in the community or at the Gateway Center as they're needed, and really is meant to serve their needs directly in the most efficient and trauma-informed, client-centered way possible. We have since increased numbers each year, last year serving about 335 households to remain housed and stably housed either through relocation or again through safety planning and rental assistance after an abusive partner has left or income has changed or different aspects that have jeopardized their housing, and being able to provide that quick response to keep them there, as well as partnering with the Gateway Center and Multnomah County and Home Forward to provide motel vouchers for those who do need emergency shelter, and being responsive to the COVID pandemic, providing basic needs, safety planning, as well as personal protective equipment for people who are living in the community and have those needs. So as we move forward, we're very excited to continue to grow and to continue to collaborate with the Gateway Center and build our programming there, and continue to adapt and change as we move forward in this work. I definitely want to thank all of our community partners who work with us, including our shelter providers who provide that integral services for the safety of survivors, and as well as those people in our community who built the foundation of this work, particularly Chris Billhart, who at the time was with Volunteers of America's Home Free program and is now with the National Association for Safe Housing. I think, yes, there's so many acronyms. And Linda Olson from the Washington Coalition Against Domestic Violence, who really built the foundation for domestic violence programming based on a housing first model to really just deliver those services as they're needed, as opposed to creating many steps and processes for people to need to go through to prove their essentially readiness or worthiness for housing. We're able to work with people and house them regardless of their issues, because we believe that housing for everyone, including survivors of domestic and sexual assault and abuse, housing is a human right, and they should have access to safe housing at any time. So we're able to use that work that has been done nationally and in this region to build on our programming and continue to improve services and our service delivery model as we go, because of the flexibility and adaptability of the models that we use. So I thank you for all being here today, and I am excited to celebrate the Gateway Center and look forward to the next decade of incredible work that they do in the community, and that we all do together to serve people. And so with that, I will introduce Stephanie Roche from Impact Northwest Parent and Child Therapy Services, and Erin Fasher. I'm sorry if I mispronounced either of your names. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Stephanie Roche. I'm the clinical supervisor with Impact Northwest Parent Child Therapeutic Services Program. And today I'm introducing Erin Fasher, one of our most experienced therapists. Erin is a LCSW. She just finished her clinical social worker certification in May 2020. So I would congratulate her on that. She's worked with Impact for 4 years. She's an avid hiker. She loves traveling, but most importantly, she has a passion for working with survivors of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. She's helped facilitate the healing for many parents and children over the past 4 years, many families. She's helped facilitate that healing. So please welcome Erin, who will discuss a little bit about our program and the work she does and others on our team do each and every day.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you so much to Martha for inviting our program here to share a bit about what we do and how our program works and how we fit in with the Gateway Center. As Stephanie said, my name is Erin Fasher, and I'm one of the therapists here at the Parent-Child Therapeutic Services Program, and we are a part of Impact Northwest. And I am just going to tell you a little bit today about our program and what our services look like. We provide therapy for survivors of domestic violence and their children, and our focus is on the child and helping the child heal from the domestic violence and abuse that the family has experienced. And our goal is to help the survivor and their children heal from this. So to do this, our clinical team provides therapy for the safe parent once they have left the relationship and their child together. And we have 4 clinicians on our team and a case manager who also helps provide case management to families and to help the survivor meet their own goals. And we have Stephanie as our clinical supervisor, and Kate Lefko is our program manager. So our program is unique, I think, in that our entire focus is on domestic violence, and the focus is really on the parent and child relationship. And as Martha said, our goal is to help the child heal from the violence that they experienced and to have that transformative experience. So the way that we do that is by helping that parent and child relationship grow and help the child get a sense of safety and security, which is one of the most important things when healing from domestic violence. So our program has been funded from the Portland Children's Levy, and we are based out at the Gateway Center. And so the majority of our referrals come from the Gateway Center navigators and other community partners. And it's been really amazing for me personally to work at the Gateway Center, since it feels like we are providing a really holistic approach to the families that we work with. So we can, while we are serving the child, we can refer the parents we work with to their own individual counselor for LifeWorks, and we can provide advocacy for families by connecting them with other services at Gateway, such as the legal aid or the immigration legal services, DHS, and help them connect with an advocate in order to file a restraining order. And we also really, I know I really appreciate the child care center at Gateway has been a huge, huge benefit for our families, and having a safe place for the children to be while we, as the therapists, meet with the parent in order to gather history from the family and talk to the parents. And within that child care center, we have a play therapy room, which is a really amazing space where there are games and toys and an area for the children to feel really safe, which is something I've heard from families that they really appreciate being able to go and able to feel safe there. So that's been a really amazing part of our work. And so the clients that we work with, the children are any child ages 0 to 12. And for our younger children who are 0 to 5, we use an intervention called child parent psychotherapy, which is focused on the safe caregiver, helping that safe caregiver provide a secure base for the child to share their story. So I've really appreciated having a play therapy space where there are therapeutic materials and dolls and toys and a safe place where the child can share through play what happened to them, and the parent is able to help the child understand that the danger has passed and they're now working towards safety. And young children are very, very resilient. So once we have helped establish that safety with the parent and child, we've seen a lot of success with our families. And the older children too, we know that it can be really difficult for families to talk together about what has happened. So we use a lot of games, different activities, board games, or art supplies to help the children relax and feel safe and just be able to share together as a family. And I think due to our funding, since we've been able to have pretty small caseloads, we have seen a lot of success through that, since we can meet with our families at least once a week and sometimes have parent consultation calls in between, and can really be flexible in that we're able to meet the family where they are at in the community, in the home, and at Gateway. And as of now, we've been doing all telehealth services. But thank you so much to Martha for letting us share about our program. And I am really excited to hear from the rest of the presenters here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin and Dredra and Stephanie. I know that we've run over a little bit, but it's really important that I get to share just a couple more slides. I'll go really quickly, but it includes some important thank yous that I need to be able to say. I first, before I go to that, just want to talk about the impact that we've had in the community. If we use the indicator of the number of people that we've served, we serve between 2,000 and 2,500 unduplicated adult survivors a year, and between 1,000 and 1,200 unduplicated child survivors of domestic violence, which means that we have impacted at minimum, 20,000 adult survivors and at least 10,000 child survivors in our time. It's a huge collective, individual level impact. And I wish, next slide, could thank every single person who's been part of the Gateway Center in the past 10 years. I find it impossible to properly express the debt the Gateway Center owes to the advocacy ancestors from the women's movement, the movement against gender-based violence. Without them, we would not be having this conversation. It's impossible to shout out to and thank all the deserving souls who both have provided services and those who have enriched us by accepting our efforts to help them. To the survivors who called on us and to those who answered the call, thank you. And who I can thank by name today are the pillars of our community who have been with us the longest. Thank you, Karina, Janet, Nancy, Jay, Hannah, Michelle, Catalina, Scott, Elena, Kate, Anna, and Sophie. You are so valuable. And I have no doubt that everybody who's been a part of the Gateway Center over the years has had a life-changing impact. Next slide. I do want to, next slide, talk about ways that we are learning to be even better. I have relied on these teachers to teach me about not being mired in the transaction of the work at the expense of the larger movement. I'm grateful to Sonali Balaji for coming into our community and helping us learn about collaboration and interconnectedness. Next slide. This is actually from Sonali's work that when she came to us in 2019. Next slide. Unknown caller. And this work has led us into a place and space of really trying to be in whole and healthy community with each other, understanding that the relationships that we have with each other are what our foundation for healing others. This is pictures of us at our annual retreat where we did interconnected art and worked on the theme of interconnectivity. It's just part of the way that we're evolving. Next slide. As a nationwide, the domestic violence and sexual assault community is, of course, going through a giant reckoning. If you have not read this whole statement that was signed by 46 statewide coalitions, I highly recommend it. It talks about mistakes we've made. It talks about failures that we've had. Next and last slide. It's also imagining a better world for us and invites us to join with others who have been building and imagining a better world. And we have those people in our community right now, and they are on a panel you are about to hear from. Alex, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Sanchez. I am the Senior Manager of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office at Multnomah County. And I'm really honored to be here today to celebrate the Gateway Center and all the amazing organizations and people that come together every day to provide services to survivors. As a person raised in Indigenous values as part of the Little Shell Tribe, I am keenly aware of the need to vision a future, even and maybe especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. Our elders teach us that we live and work and make decisions not just for ourselves, but for the people who will be here 7 generations from now. And so it's my pleasure to help create a space for that visioning for us in our community of domestic violence survivors and practitioners. As we begin, I want to ground us in the words of Black feminist writer and activist and self-proclaimed troublemaker Alexis Pauline Gumbs from her foreword to Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement. This is a space created by people who imagine that a more ethical and loving world can emerge in the middle of the worst muck of racialized, ableist heterocapital. The primary offering here is a space to be. Be here, be all over the place, be messy, be wrong, be bold in your hopefulness, be confused in community, be reaching past isolation, be part of the problem. Be hungry for after, be helpful in the midst, be so early in the process, be broken by belief, be bolstered by brave comrades, be unbelievably unready, be alive. And to help us do all of that today, we have brought together a panel of folks who are deeply engaged in the transformative justice movement. I want to introduce you to several folks. First, Alexandra Appleton. She is a North Portland native and survivor. Alexandra is a local social services consumer and provider who strives to reduce harm and to meet the needs of victims and survivors, including those at risk of experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. Alexandra volunteers on multiple advocacy campaigns to raise awareness of underserved communities, including incarceration, reentry, houselessness, and medical and mental welfare. Alexandra is currently on the board of A Home for Everyone and Call to Safety. She holds equity and culturally specific programming in high regard and is a devoted mother to 3 children. Next is Alexis Robinson Woods. Alexis, her pronouns, she, her, or they, them, is the Programs and Services Director at Bradley Engel, where they oversee all programs and business operations, including shelter, Healing Roots, the LGBTQ+ program, economic empowerment programs, and housing services. Both at Bradley Engel and local and statewide conferences, Alexis works with agencies to align services to better meet the needs of people of color, especially transgender and gender diverse survivors and LGBTQ communities of color. Alexis uses her knowledge as a former police and court officer for 20 years to advocate for survivors within our legal systems and to address the impact of systemic trauma and power and control on survivors of violence. Combined with their experience as a transgender Black woman, Alexis is a leading advocate in a career dedicated to social justice for marginalized individuals, specializing within the intersections of LGBTQ communities of color, intimate partner violence, and those living with HIV/AIDS. Next, radical educator and artist Vo, pronouns they, them, theirs, has lectured on inclusion, race, and social justice on 4 continents with the aim of affecting institutional and organizational change, focused on the empowerment of young people, students, and people of color. In the 5 years they have resided in the US, they have professionally trained staff from over 200 organizations in Oregon around inclusion, trauma-informed care, transformative justice, intercultural communication, and de-escalation. Corey Lira is a survivor, educator, and a prison industrial complex abolitionist and community organizer. She's spoken internationally on prison industrial complex abolition, transformative justice, community accountability. She loves speaking to the ways that we can think outside of carceral logic and disposability and how this moves us closer to our collective liberation. She works in student affairs and confidential advocacy at Portland State University and organizes with Critical Resistance Portland and Care Not Cops PDX. And finally, our facilitator, Claire Barrera, is an artist, organizer, and educator based in Portland, Oregon. They have participated in anti-violence movements for over 2 decades. Currently, they work with El Programa Hispanos Proyecto Única and organize with the collective Brown Girl Rise. It's my pleasure to turn the stage over to all of them.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really appreciative of the space that we are taking today and really appreciative of the way Alex grounded this conversation in Black and Indigenous movements, really where work of justice comes from. I'm also really thrilled to have these 4 panelists with me having a conversation. There are 4 people that I admire so much and are doing such incredible work to create futures without systemic violence. So to get our conversation started, it's now. So what are the systems, how would you describe the systems that serve domestic and sexual and trafficking as they are now, both, services provided by as well as government and criminal justice system services. What is happening in terms of justice and healing and ending violence for survivors in terms of the current system? And I will go ahead and pass it to Vo first.
Will you now? Okay. So I think that I would love to invite, our viewers on YouTube and other channels to consider this question also. How would you describe the system that you are familiar with working in, whether that be DVSA or justice, criminal justice system? and how would you measure its either success or flaws? Yeah, I think I won't take up too much time, but I would say that, you know, under colonialism, the justice system and the systems that we work in are essentially, you know, ableist and determined by white supremacy. And because of those things, we're seeing those systems not address structural oppression, right? That's one of the kind of failures of the current system. Often in a criminal sense, we tend to neglect the survivor or the so-called victim, and it tends to be focused on punitive measures for the perpetrator. So there's an imbalance in how systems can hold space for different people in a situation. And also the systems we live in now are prescriptive. So it's very much one size fits all, regardless of the situation, regardless of the power imbalances and the structural complexities. Everyone kind of gets this one outcome or a similar outcome. And then we also know that it's re-traumatizing, that a lot of these systems are re-traumatizing, and they're pulling people through ways of testifying or ways of retelling a story, or exposing people to systems that are re-traumatizing for them and compounding the impacts of trauma for those folks. I'll stop it for there, but I'm looking forward to talking about some other aspects that as we expose them over the course of this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Bo. Would Corey or Alexis or Alexandra want to add on anything?
I'll add a little bit to that. Having worked in both systems, one of the biggest holes, I think, is the lack of ability to work together. The missions are very different from the social services that we provide and the criminal justice system that's supposed to assist us in doing what we do. We're coming from two different very views of how to solve something. And as long as that remains to be the case, we're not going to get very far. We have to, one, decriminalize Blackness as it lists in our system right now. And so when we're providing things like culture-specific services and stuff like that, who's defining what that means? Is the culture-civic service being defined by the culture who needs that services, or is it being defined by somebody who's looking at Black or Hispanic or Indigenous folks saying this is what they need without asking them first what they need? That's one of the bigger issues that I see.
Thank you.
For me, hi everybody. For me, I see the system reenacting white dominance, not only in culturally responsive, but culturally specific agencies as well. And so that's really important to look at in the DVSA system. And we can call the bluff of the criminal justice system, but what really has me is the argument of criminalizing prostitution and sex work. And I come from a place with lived experience. So like for me, it's very empowering for me to have ownership of all of this, which is my vessel. And so the healing isn't in that I can say that here and now. And so and then it goes further. I intentionally attempt to create safer spaces. And I see others on the panel were intentionally trying to create safer spaces, and that weight is heavy, especially when you're trying to decriminalize Blackness and create, uplift survivors. It's really interesting how it is becoming more and more obvious as we're holding folks and entities accountable what folks are about, when and why. And that has also been really interesting to kind of sit back and witness folks, for lack of better words, fragility. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah,
Thank you, Alexandra.
Sorry for jumping the gun there. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be on this panel with everyone. And I'm coming from the perspective of someone who does do confidential advocacy as part of my role as assistant director of the Women's Resource Center at PSU. But most of my perspective is actually, I won't be speaking from that role. I'll be speaking from my role as a community organizer and as a survivor and as someone who's working outside of systems. And so, I think the thing I would add, the echo and also uplift what's been shared is that for me and the work that I do, we start from the basis of the system is not broken. And I think so much of the narrative that we talk about is that it's broken, it needs to be fixed, we need new solutions. And, I'm here to say pretty unequivocally, the system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. And because it's working exactly as designed, I don't believe there's a way to fix it. I don't believe there's a way to change it and shift it to ever do what we want it to do. And that's a hard thing to swallow because so many of us are in it and we're trying to do right by the people that we're servicing and being, in support of and helping, with navigate, consider what could exist if we stop trying to fix it. And so, I see my internet's a little unstable, so forgive me if any of that broke up. But, I think my main thing I want to just really reinforce is that there is no way to take the legacy of the prison industrial system starting as a way to control and kill and cage Black people and ever see the way that our work in these ways that participates in those systems can really serve everyone and can never do justice to true survivor experiences. And I want us to start there so that we can actually think about what it would actually mean to think about real justice, healing, and resolution, and about really finding self-determined ways to do what we want to do. I think all of us watching and participating want to do the things that we all want to do, right, for each other. And so often the system's getting away from actually doing that. And so that's why I think talking about transformative justice today is exciting, because looking ahead, I just think we need to stop the narrative of thinking about fixing something and really thinking about abolition. I know it's the hot word, but having done this work for nearly a decade, this is work that we've been doing for a long time. And it goes back to our original models that are beyond the system that we know.
Thanks, Corey. Each of you sort of shared some of the things that you see happening right now in the system, criminalization of Blackness. Bo was sharing some of the ways that survivors can be harmed in the process. And I'm curious, in your thinking, what are some of the underlying beliefs behind our current system of carceral justice and nonprofit services? So specifically, what are the sort of beliefs that motivate the choices of the way things are working now, which obviously are not the choices of you all, but are things that we're seeing or some of us have worked in and participated in nonprofit work and within carceral systems?
I will comment on that. Having worked actually in the justice system, having worked in a jail and made decisions of who released and who stayed, I can tell you it's horribly flawed. And Corey is actually right. You can't fix something that was built on something the basis was horribly wrong. As of right now, the way the system works, separation, crime and punishment, all those things, these are not community-based ideas of healing. You cannot separate a family and somehow hope that that family will heal because you locked up one of them long-term, because what you've done is you just set the next generation for it to happen again. And so particularly in BIPOC communities where it's usually the Black father who's in jail for an extended period of time, and there's very little given to what's happening to that child. Very little is given about what that child is actually going to grow up believing about the system, believing about his parents, believing about his mom. These are things that we aren't taken into consideration when somebody is arrested. It's all about, well, we need to do this, we need to handle that, we need to prosecute it, based on what? And on the other end of that, what have we actually done? What have we actually resolved? because all we've done is we've separated, we've made it harder for the person who you arrested to actually have any kind of life, to do anything for this child, because once they get out of jail, the system is not set up to prepare them or to accept them back as an actual contributing member of society. No, they're brought back to be belittled, they're on probation, they're dealing with parole officers, they're dealing with all these things that are not helping them help the situation. So the way the system is run right now, like I said, it doesn't work. It has to change in order for us as survivors ourselves and folks working with survivors, in order for us to do our job effectively, that some of that has to give.
Yeah, I think I hear you talking a little bit to something that we all talked about before, which is sort of this this binary between the victim and the perpetrator, which I think is one of the beliefs behind separating families, right, and incarcerating the abuser, is this idea that there's the bad guy and the good guy. Would anybody want to speak more to that and some of the other beliefs that are behind our current system, or values that are behind the current system? So, where's that you?
Was it me?
Corey.
Yeah. I think for capitalism and white supremacy to work, we have to believe in a good person and a bad person. We have to believe in someone who's flawed and harmful and unable to be fixed or healed or, return to good again, so that we can compartmentalize and think of people as disposable. And I think if we shift out of that narrative, and I think about what Marianne Kaba has said, which is that no one enters violence for the first time by committing it. And if we're looking at all of us as people who've experienced violence in some way, the violence of the state, violence of white supremacy, violence of, all these different things, then I think it removes that dichotomy. And we have to actually talk about healing justice. We have to actually talk about what it means to actually be accountable. And I think it goes to what Alexis is talking about, which is that none of that is ever served by like putting people in cages. Like no cage is ever going to like be the thing that begins healing work for anyone. And I think the same goes for, the minute that we criminalize people. And I think about how, so often the work that we're trying to do to like keep people safe from, perpetrators often results also in like mothers being criminalized for how they take care of their children. And the ways in which mothers are often seen as neglectful for being partnered with someone who's abusive, versus really talking about the conditions that led to violence to begin with. And if we actually talk about the conditions, then we have to stop talking about the people individually as being the reason why there's harm, as opposed to the conditions that led to harm. And then we have to like move out of that thing where we're thinking that like putting someone in this little box is going to fix anything, which isn't to say there shouldn't be consequences for our actions. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I think the consequences for our action have to be transformative, and they have to really reflect the conditions that led to that situation. And if we're not getting to the root, then we're only going to continue to replicate and replicate and replicate and continue to reinforce this idea that there's a good person and a bad person, someone who harms and someone who's been harmed. And it's never murky and it's never blurry. And that it just doesn't work. I think we all know it doesn't work, and we're all scrambling to try to make it work. But I think at the end of the day, we know it doesn't work because that's not how people actually are. I'm a survivor. I've also harmed people. I can say that. I can say that I've done things that weren't good to other people, and I had to be responsible for that and accountable to that. And, that doesn't make me good or bad. That makes me a human. And I think we have to think outside of that dichotomy.
Yeah, you cool? Okay. To kind of riff off that, North America and the culture here is incredibly, there's a lot of stress and emphasis put on the individual here. And what that means is it also blames the individual for things, rather than recognizing how the conditions and the collective and the culture has created the the conditions that led to people feeling like they need to do it. They need to do things to survive, or they need to do things to cope with all of the trauma and all of the crap that they're dealing with. So I think I think in this society, people are very attached to individual choices and therefore individual blame. And that leads to demonizing or criminalizing or excluding people. And I think the other part of it is the capitalist piece, right? So it's more economic to put someone away, or supposedly it's more economic. People believe that it's more economic to cancel something or to put it in a place we don't see it. But that doesn't address any, social or cultural change. It doesn't address the original conditions that created a situation where people feel driven to do particular things. And similarly, to mirror what Corey said, I'm a survivor of several different types of violence, and I've definitely caused harm, perpetrated harm to folks in my lifetime, which I'm still in the process of trying to make amends for it and reparations for it. So I think because of time, this sense of urgency, this feeling of scarcity, it's perceived scarcity, the money thing, folks are very attached to quick and easy solutions, and part of that is demonizing folks or labeling like, okay, this is the bad person, they'll always be the bad person, we just need to put them out of the picture so we don't have to think about them anymore. And also, we live in a brutal system, a system that is, we are seeing the logical conclusion of a brutal and cruel system that has enacted itself over hundreds of years. So we are attached to these ideas because we've lived in the system, and we believe these things around punishment, around physical cruelty, and around isolation as a solution to human problems. And so I think there is a real attachment to these things that aren't actually solutions, but because they're in our culture, we're so used to them. So that's something. Over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you so much. I'm like multitasking. I really appreciate
Hey, Alexandra, I just want to let you know that you're breaking up quite a bit. It's pretty hard to hear you. Are there any other options?
Yeah, I will try another option.
That's a bummer. We'll come back to that and hear from Alexandra. Perhaps she'll be calling in, which would be great. In the meantime, I think you all have highlighted some of these beliefs behind, what runs our current system, what Bo just shared. And I would love to hear from you, because we wanted to really look at, we wanted to pick apart a little bit of what things are like now. But really the goal of this panel is to talk about what is possible, what different things are possible. So a lot of people have heard transformative justice, but don't really know what that means, don't really know what the definition is. I'm wondering if any of you panelists who feel comfortable could share with us, how would you explain what transformative justice is to somebody who didn't know, hadn't heard of it before? And in particular, what is it offering that's in counter to or different from some of the things that you all have mentioned in the last few questions?
I'm happy to give a definition that I use, and then maybe other folks can bounce off of it. I think the beauty of transformative justice is there's no one definition, because it is a model. It is not a step-by-step thing. And so we have to have different definitions to respond to different situations. But I think for me, I think of transformative justice, I'll give a short version and a long version that kind of explains it. So I think transformative justice is a framework for both people's ability to get on the path towards healing, alongside an organizing strategy to get at the roots of the form of violence. And so I think a little bit more deeply for me, that means transformative justice seeks immediate safety for those who are harmed, and the changing of conditions that led to the harm in the first place, which you've spoken to, and the resources to help everyone involved in the harm to be able to seek healing, and for the person who harmed to have the support needed, to be accountable and have the resources needed to do so. And so for me, it's important that we're talking about transformative justice as opposed to restorative justice. And I don't think there's harm in talking about restorative justice necessarily. I will say it's been co-opted by the state a lot, and so I can't endorse it. But for me, restorative justice imagines returning to before the harm happened. It's restoring. That's the point, to like restore back to the moment, to the time before harm happened, so that everyone's like back to where that is. And I don't believe that's possible, because I think the conditions that lead to harm are greater than the individual situation that occurred. And so transformative justice really is looking forward. It's saying what needs to change for this harm never to happen again. What needs to change for this person to be accountable, for the person who experienced the harm to be healed and able to move forward in their life. And that's about changing conditions and about resources. And that's different. That's transformative work. And that's why I believe it's called transformative justice. That's the working definition I use. And I think we can talk a little bit more about like what that looks like in practice, but I will start there as offering that.
Thank you so much, Corey. It looks like we have Alexandra back. So Alexandra, did you want to share what you were saying before still, if you remember?
I hope so. Am I better connected right now? I totally apologize. I hope so. So what I would like to say is that one of my underlying beliefs are that brown and Black individuals do not have the right to body autonomy, consent, and healthy sexuality. And I say that because you can ask an elder or an older individual that is brown or Black, especially a Black African-American, and ask them who the modern day Jezebel or Sapphire or mad Black woman is. And it says a lot to the way that we, not only us as Black people, feel about themselves, about each other, and about the way the society feels about us. And I'm not sure if this was talked about, but I do think it's important for us to also talk. You can't talk about the system without talking about the economics, which was talked about. But when you talk about industry level areas, I mean, Detroit and Flint was the perfect example. 10 years later, it's still impoverished. If we close down the prisons, what do we do with those employed workers, right? And so when we talk about transformative justice, I agree with all the things that we talked about, but I would like for more conversations to be like, what are we going to do that is shutting down an entire population of people, right? And yes, those same individuals may not agree with the criminal justice system, but why would they vote to get rid of the criminal justice system if their job relies on it? And then to dig deeper to that, the criminal justice system, the individuals that are employed by the criminal justice system, they're also consumers of the sex industry. And so those are the type of restorative, if we can answer those kind of questions, like what are we going to do with the loss of the jobs, then that's when we start to transform with the answers. I'll stop right there because I need to catch up on some stuff, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexandra. We had just started talking when you were gone about how we define transformative justice and how does it readdress or offer an alternative to some of the beliefs that you just shared. So Alexis, Bo, do either of you want to share anything beyond what Corey said already?
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, I think a couple of things. So where do I start? So Alexandra, what you just brought up around bodily autonomy, right? That is the lack of that, the lack of autonomy comes from a culture that is reliant on surveillance, threats of violence, threats to people's livelihood, the kind of dangling carrot of, scarcity, all larger systems of violence like the justice system when it does disproportionately impact, you know, black communities. So I just want to tie what you just said to like the way that those systems create that lack of autonomy and the inherent anti-blackness in the ways that all these systems were set up. And then to address the kind of second part of what you said around, yeah, transformative justice, which is tied with abolition, absolutely. They, you know, kind of can't work, one can't kind of work without the other. And similar to anti-racism and anti-capitalism and trauma-informed care, all of these different interlocking disability justice, all of these interlocking things that need each other to really fulfill themselves. It's like a flipping of maybe what you're used to thinking. So instead of like, you know, what other prisons maybe they'll work in, then maybe instead it's like, how can resources be poured into those communities so that health, education, we know all these things, right? You know, those are the things that are resourced, and then the jobs look different. The jobs are care workers and mental health workers and first responders who are de-escalators and not first responders who are escalators. So yeah, the jobs just look different because the money looks different, because the investment looks different, because the culture looks different. So like going back up the chain again. But yeah, absolutely. Just to add to what Corey described around TJ, it is a model that it is a political strategy. It is a tool. It is, you know, multi-pronged thing, and it's a vision. But it is an attempt to understand that we do right now sit on a system that is flawed, and that there are small ways, community-based ways, larger scale ways, citywide ways to start building new systems. And the systems are survivor-centered. They focus on the agency and healing of survivors and the safety of survivors. They focus on the accountability and transformation of all communities, not just perpetrators, not just individuals, but entire communities. And they're focused on mutual aid and community action. And I know these are like buzzwords. Some of these words are like, what are you even talking about? You know, they seem so broad, but I'm really excited to, we have 20-ish minutes left, and I think we'll start to talk about some more examples that feel more on the ground and maybe more practical. Yeah, that's it. Over to you, Alexis.
Just to save time, I won't add a whole lot to this. I'd always appreciate what everybody has to add on that. To me, it's all that, and then it's just those simple forms, the simplest things of funding treatment facilities versus jails, funding. We have, all of us here, we work for agencies that work with survivors. How many agencies do we have actually working with the abuser to somehow affect change so when they get out, things are better for everybody involved? To me, that's what includes in transformative justice. It is literally healing for everybody, not just crime, not just punishment. Because all putting somebody in jail does is it stops it for that particular moment in time, period. That's all. It has never worked as a deterrent, and we know it doesn't work as a deterrent, or people wouldn't keep ending up back in it. The system set on oppressive behavior, harm, and abuse is why it exists to begin with as it is. So yeah, some of those most basic things that we do are part of that.
I love to just add a couple quick thoughts that I think maybe haven't been named, but I just want to be clear on, is that if we're really worried about addressing harm and violence, then we have to acknowledge that the prison industrial complex and prisons are a source of violence. And so we can't be anti-violence workers if we still uphold a system of violence. And I think that's like hard to grapple with that. But if we want to talk about sexual violence, prisons are a source of sexual violence. We want to talk about interpersonal violence, prisons are part of interpersonal violence. We want to talk about violence and ending it, we have to end the prison industrial complex. And to do that, we have to envision other forms of healing justice work that doesn't rely on a form of violence to get there. And I just, I know that's like me being like, it's just that, but like, what if we actually grappled with that? What if we actually spent time thinking about that and evaluating what we do from that lens?
Yeah, I think, Corey, a lot of, advocates really aren't happy with the way things are for their participants, for survivors they work with either, or for themselves. Many advocates are survivors themselves or people of color or, experience harm within the current system. At the same time, I've found that when the conversation comes up around transformative justice, people who are involved somehow in the current systems, whether it be nonprofits or government work, criminal justice work, are very quick to say, yeah, but what about this? Or what about this, right? Despite the fact that I think in individual moments, folks do feel frustrated with how things are and wish they could give their survivors better help, there's still an attachment to the way things are. And one of the ways that comes out is that rather than spending a lot of energy noticing what's not working now, we spend a lot of energy thinking of all the ways something different couldn't work. And I'm curious, for those of you who've been doing this work and talking about this work for a long time, like what are some of the most common, like, yeah, but things that people say to you all, and how do you answer them? Like when somebody's like, well, yeah, that sounds really great, but what about this? What are those things that come up and how do you all answer those?
Yeah, so to piggyback off what Corey said, I just had to look for a statistic real quick. One of the questions is like, what about violent crimes? Who's going to handle violent crimes? And again, reframing and understanding that the criminal justice system and that includes police and prisons is a source of militarization and violence, right? So the understanding that it's not a solution for a lot of communities, for most communities. It's actually the source of it for a lot of communities. And we know that we've seen it on video for many years. So there's no question around that. It's just a flipping of what we're used to thinking and believing and who we typically associate with safety, that we need to kind of flip that. So the statistic that I just brought up was 2/3 of people who experience sexual violence never report it to anyone. So we know that, right? Those who file police reports are often dissatisfied with their response. Additionally, police officers themselves commit sexual assault alarmingly often. A study in 2010 found that sexual misconduct was the second most frequently reported form of police misconduct. In 2015, the Buffalo News found that an officer was caught for sexual misconduct every 5 days. So I'm just trying to ground that into this idea that we have of putting people on a pedestal for creating safety for some communities, some very specific middle-class, moneyed, white communities, and pulling it into reality where they're actually a source of violence, and in this case, sexual violence for several communities.
Yeah, thanks. And I also want to say, those are amazing statistics. And I'm also curious to hear from you all about the ways that also like social services aren't working and or may cause harm in the way that they're grounded right now, which obviously is part of that is the collaboration of nonprofits with law enforcement and with carceral justice. So yeah, bringing that aspect in as well, because I know all of you have a lot to share on the ways that nonprofit social services can be harmful as well as they currently function. Bringing that in and then continuing to ask, like, what are some of the common, like, but what about questions that you all hear and how you like to answer them?
I'll be really short and then I'll pass it over. But I think that when working with clients, families, survivors, and perpetrators, when there is like a solution offered, when someone's like, this is the next step, we're going to refer them to so-and-so, the question I would ask is, does this create safety and healing? Does this contribute to safety and healing? Or is it re-traumatizing and damaging? So if the answer is the second, then why are we doing this? Why would we refer? So I always go back to that question and check in, like, is this creating a transformation of their former conditions? Does it add to education? Does it add to safety for anybody or like either social safety, financial safety, emotional safety, or does it not? If it doesn't, why are we doing that? So that's a very broad answer to kind of start that conversation.
Yeah, I'll just jump in because I want to, honor everyone else's time to be able to contribute. But I think the hard part about this work is that we know it's about the conditions, which I'll just be a broken record about. But, I think to me, it's like if we really, all the reasons why I think people push back on transformative justice is because of, the urgency I think that Vo has spoken to, that like we really want like quick, immediate solutions. And the reality is that like healing work and accountability work is long-term work. And so, capitalism wants us to have an immediate solution to everything. And the reality is that for it to really address the conditions and really to change things, it often requires like a very short term, like those interim measures that is then matched with long-term work. And I think we get stuck in the interim measures. And I think then we think that, this transformative justice model can't work because it can't serve those direct immediate needs. And I would challenge that because I think that, one, I would challenge this idea that healing justice work and accountability work has a timeline, like that it has to be done by a certain time. And also I think that we underappreciate people's communities and their ability to show up for each other, given the resources that either they have or that they need. Like if we give people money, what could they do to like take care of themselves differently, right? Like if we gave people like secure housing, how much easier would it be to resolve harm happening in a family? If we gave people like X, Y, and Z, like how would it actually allow there to be the spaciousness to like do that work? And similarly, like to get someone out of a situation and provide resources that are like long-term and allow that space and that safety, I think it just looks different. And so, I think for me, there isn't one simple answer to everything. And I think that makes it hard to see TJ as effective. But, I would just say like, we don't have to have all the answers and there's no one right cookie cutter model to address all harm. And it doesn't often result in a beautiful, clean cut feeling of healing. And so when that happens, it's like, wow, that didn't work. But I think what we know is that the criminal and justice system already is failing at what it does, right? So that can't be a good option. And we don't have to know all the answers to know that the system we have right now isn't it. It just isn't it. So I would just question this thing that like, we have this thing that's working and now you're asking us to do something different, Yeah, so I would encourage us to look at like removing our capitalist white supremacist ideas around like what has to happen and when, and then think about like if everyone was given the resources that they need and they want right now, what could happen? And I think that that is a different conversation. And recognizing that for many of us, we're not in those places of power to make those decisions. So how do we then leverage and push on those who do have the power to make those changes?
Alexis or Alexandra, do you want to add to that at all?
Real quick, only thing I'd like to add is in my almost 20 years of working within the criminal justice system, I've never seen it make anyone better. I've never seen somebody come out on the other end and go, thank you for locking me up for an undetermined amount of time. And then I remember I graduated from the police academy almost in 1995. So I'm hoping they've changed some of the things they teach even now, because there was nothing about how you deal with a human. There was no training on communication and talking and being able to have that with anybody. It is saddening because I went in that kind of work thinking that I could fix that I could change that I could somehow do that. And all I did was keep running into that same wall and just brick wall over and over after 20 years to the point where it just couldn't do it anymore. Now I look at it from another side, from the other system, and I can see just how bad it is and how it doesn't work for the people that my organization works with. There's 81% of us identify as people of color, and the people we work with are 82% people of color. And so we are the people that we represent. And that's a hard thing to do with everything going on right now, because we are actually feeling everything else the people we serve are feeling. And yet we still are expected to be able to provide services and things to these folks when we don't have those things to get through our day to make us feel better, except for the community in which we work together.
Yeah, I appreciate what you just shared, what everybody just shared. It's interesting because I very rarely see studies or like the aftermath of the survivors and victims will get
Alexandra, you got that same issue again with your sound. So maybe if you turned off the video when you talked, we might be able to hear you.
There you go. I'm so sorry. This is the last time I'll talk because I don't want to waste up too much time. But if, I just think it's really important for us to also recognize that there are so many of us that are survivors and victims that are doing the work, and what has worked for us transformatively, we really need to focus on what is going to stabilize us. The people that are working for the people that represent them, like it's hard and it's difficult and it's very taxing. And so what does that look like for us to continue to not only lift the weight, survive, number one, right? Because every day we have to survive just for today. And then also support other people. And so really focusing on what the supports do we need to tribal, indigenous, Black, and other people of color need, advocates and sexual and domestic victims alike. That is of utmost importance, definitely.
Thank you, Alexandra. And we're at a point where we need to wrap up, but I did want to just ask the panels for maybe 1 or 2 sentences on like what's next and what can our domestic and sexual violence community actually do to shift towards in this direction. And if you have like 1 or 2 sentences or maybe a resource to point people towards, that would be great. So let's do that in a round. And is it okay if I start with you, Alexis?
Sure. Real quick, 2 sentences I would have for what's next is identifying culturally competent and culturally specific services. And what I mean by identifying, meaning not simply saying what it is and saying that that's a culturally specific service. No, what is the definition of it and who is it providing culturally specific services for? A color of somebody's skin does not define culturally specific services. Whether or not they know what's going on in that particular culture and what that person might need, that should be the definition of culturally specific services.
Thank you. Corey?
Yeah, I would just say, what if we move towards consequences and not punishment? What would it look like? And what if we move towards healing justice work and not thinking about, the dichotomy of good or bad for people, and really move out of this idea that there are some of us who harm and some of us who've harmed, and it's as simple as that. And real quickly, I'm a big fan of resources, so I'm just gonna show a bunch in 20 seconds. But Fumbling Towards Repair by Miriam Kaba, it's a how-to guide on transformative justice that I think every advocate should have a copy and reference. Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement that documents decades and decades of this work. It's not new. The Revolution Starts at Home, another good anthology of resources. And then I think for us to really do this, we have to be grounded in disability justice. So some tooth and bone, the basis of the movement is our people. You can get this online as a PDF for $7 from Susan Ballard. Transformharm.org is a website that has amazing resources. And I have my own guide that's at bit.ly/TJ guide that has 12 pages of resources on this. And so just want to ground that this is not just us talking. This is work, this is strategy, this is models, this is decades and decades and decades of work. And there are many resources, and I hope that people will engage with it.
Okay, but we're Alexandra, anything 1 or 2 last sentences?
I think it's really, really important for folks to create safer spaces for Black and Brown people to not only share their untold secrets, but share their smothered voices, and then just deal with the trauma. And the sooner Portland, Oregon can create those safer spaces, I think it'll be, the better it'll be. The Portland community is so small and we are so interconnected. And I think that we just need to heal. And that is where I think that the most DVSA prevention and awareness will happen.
Thanks.
Yeah, just me and Corey just shared some documents that can be posted in the YouTube chat, which lists a lot of different community accountability and transformative justice resources. I know in my document has a lot of free PDFs around abolition and books that were recently made free by abolitionists so folks could understand some of the deeper work. Like other people have said, this work has been happening for time immemorial. You know, this is a model that is a lot older than this system that we're currently waiting in. So to ground yourself in the understanding that transformative justice is very old, and that it's work that's been going for a long time. And I know that people are hungry for like examples or observations. And all I can say is that the work that I've done, I've started a community accountability, transformative justice organization in London in 2010, and then started two others. And then one of them has a website, which is transformativejustice.eu, I believe, Europe. And then also in the last 5 years doing this work in school systems and using a transformative justice model under the guise of restorative justice, but really addressing the school to prison pipeline and seeing the change, the cultural change that's happened in the last 5 to 6 years of old school teachers who would never have considered this new mode of conflict mediation and power imbalance addressing, who maybe previously would have gone straight to punishing the kid and excluding the kid and suspending the kid, to moving from that to like, oh yeah, we just need to have a discussion, figure out how reparations and amends can be made. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not completely on the horizon, really far away. It's not completely unimaginable. It's already been happening for so long, and we're experiencing the cultural shifts already. So I encourage you to talk to people who are practicing it to understand it from the inside.
That's a great way to end us, Bo. Thank you so much to our panelists for this amazing conversation. And I'll pass it off to Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Claire. And thank you to all the panelists. It really was an amazing conversation. And obviously we could have gone on for another hour. I'm really sorry that we have run out of time. I want to give my co-chair of the Gateway Center Council a couple of minutes. Joanne Hardesty, Commissioner Hardesty has been able to join us. Commissioner Hardesty?
I was trying to unmute and also unmute my video, but I think the powers that be have my video still muted, so I'm stuck. Hopefully they will let me in. There we are. I'm here. I just want to say just how compelling all the information I heard from the panelists were. And how courageous to be at this moment in our state, in our country, around addressing things that we've never talked about publicly, right? Racial injustice, racial inequality that is systemic in every part of every government entity that we have. I'm certainly going to look forward to working with each of you as we move forward under this new vision of what's possible. And I am sad that I don't have an opportunity to share with you some of the stuff that we are doing that I believe will help with the day-to-day work that you're doing. I look forward to us meeting again. Unfortunately, I actually am now late for my 1 o'clock. but I thank you all. I appreciate the resources that were shared. And I just want to say, restorative justice to me means that we solve problems at the lowest level possible and we solve them in the community first. Prisons haven't solved problems. Locking people up hasn't solved problems. Overpolicing has not solved problems. I am happy to be part of a movement that says, let's not do that anymore. Let's think differently and let's invest our limited dollars differently. And I look forward to working with Commissioner Jalapar and the rest of the county commission and the rest of you and making sure that as we move forward, the Gateway Center is a model of how we do justice in a way that respects the rights of the individuals who've been harmed. That should be our top priority and not doing what law enforcement thinks we need to do to create justice. So thank you all and see you next month.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. There's not much more to add to that. What I want to say is I want to lift up a couple of things we heard in the conversation and take us back to where Alex started us, which is with that wonderful quote about a better world is within reach. And I think what we've heard from all of you today are some grounding concepts that really do provide a framework for getting us there. And I lift up, Corey, your definition of transformative justice. I loved it because I think each of the elements of that definition are things that we can all of us, even those who are not in this particular room, agree on. And that is, we're looking for immediate safety. We're looking to change the conditions that cause harm. And we're looking for the resources to allow that change to happen. And that's where our focus needs to be. And I truly believe that that does point us in the direction of that better world. So with that, again, thank you everybody for who put this together. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, the whole team. Thank you to the panelist facilitator and everybody who's joined us to watch, and to all of you who do this work every day, my deepest appreciation.